You're listening to A Deeper Dive, a part of the Winsight Podcast Network.
How have urban markets changed since the pandemic? Hello, this is Jonathan Mays, Editor-in-Chief of Restaurant Business. And in this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, I speak with Chip Wade, the CEO of Union Square Hospitality Group. I could have talked with Chip for hours, but don't. Chip has a long and distinguished career in the restaurant industry. He was named CEO of Union Square last year after working with the company since 2019. Before that, he worked for 17 years with Darden Restaurants and had previously worked with Legal Seafoods and Carlson Restaurants. And we talk about a wide range of issues. He provides some interesting insight, for instance, on how the New York market is different now than it was in 2019 before the pandemic, and how the company has had to adjust. We also talk about all kinds of things, including an update on Union Square's business, building and maintaining a strong culture inside restaurants, always important, and how the transition has gone since he took over as CEO from Danny Meyer. It is a great conversation with the CEO of Union Square Hospitality Group, so please check it out. Okay, I am here with Chip Wade. Chip, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. Excited to be here.
All right. So, let's see. You got to Union Square's president in 2019, yeah?
That's correct.
Great timing.
Yeah, amazing timing. May of 2019, and 7 months later, the world changed materially.
Yeah. So how are things right now? As of June 7th, 2023, when we're recording this, how are things at Union Square?
I would say things are extremely well. We've got great momentum across all of our businesses. The city, the big economic engines that drive the city are obviously Broadway, finance, et cetera. Broadway and entertainment has been back for a while, and so that feels great. A little slower in Lower Manhattan, Wall Street area, but in general, things at USHG are progressing at an amazing clip. Very exciting period to be at Union Square Hospitality Group.
Huh. So you sort of kind of describe probably almost in a nutshell some of the issues certainly in the restaurant industry. So you got Lower Manhattan, which is probably dependent on workers.
Sure.
And they're still working from home while your locations around Broadway and Times Square and whatnot doing pretty well because everybody's going out and having fun. So they're leaving the house to have fun. They're not leaving the house for work. Yeah,
that's true, right? I think all big cities, and I would say across America, the workforce dynamic has changed material. And so this idea of a 5-day work week and taking the train and coming to the office for the most part, at least for the past 3 years and for the foreseeable future, is not likely to come back. And so we're seeing our restaurants full clearly Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. What we're seeing is softer lunch periods, number one. The other thing that we're seeing is our evening business starts sooner. So even if I'm working from my apartment or condo, there's no boss around the corner. I may shut things down at 4:15 and then go grab a cold adult beverage at Gramercy Tavern or Union Square Cafe. So we're seeing almost a new segment of business and guests coming in much earlier than pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that my New York employees are leaving work early to go have a beer, is that right?
I'm saying we're certainly seeing an uptick in business during that period. And if we're fortunate enough to get some of your great employees, then we're excited.
But how do you manage it? I guess the theory at this particular point is that that's permanent, but is it? I mean, how do you manage, how do you plan for an environment like that?
Well, I don't know if you necessarily can plan for it because clearly no one planned for the pandemic. I think as you said, for me, it's about how do we manage the new workforce dynamic? Because the employees, not just in hospitality, but I think in financial services, in marketing, across all disciplines, have had a new awakening because of the pandemic. Quality of life and quality of work is, I think, increasingly more important. And so we have to manage how people think about work, coming to work, et cetera. That's here within our own offices. And then for our restaurants, it means we probably have to bring in employees sooner than we did pre the pandemic for those evening shifts. It means that we have less employees during the lunch period because they're softer than they were in 2019. Now, again, it's a case by case, business by business. We operate in hotels, we operate in museums, and so we're fortunate to be in several people's houses, so we get to see the full spectrum of the workforce dynamic.
Oh, that's an interesting point. So since you're mentioning workforce, I know this is a big issue for your company. One of the big things that this industry loves to talk about, probably as much, if not more than any other industry, is culture. And building a proper culture. That has obviously been a huge issue for the restaurant industry in the last couple of years, because those companies, at least my perception, is that those companies that have had a good workforce culture have been able to do better over the past couple of years versus, and probably historically, but it really showed the last couple of years. If you've had a better workforce culture, you have been able to do better during this period. You've been able to get better employees. You've been able to keep employees. You've been able, and then that, of course, translates into good sales. How do you go about building a good workforce culture?
That's a great question. I would say a couple of things. I'm going to state the obvious. Any leader, any organization has to be committed and fully understand how culture drives the economic engine of your business, whether it's hospitality, whether you're in the airline business, but you have to profoundly embrace and know that culture drives the economic engine. The second point I would make is, which Danny has a 38-year rich history of creating an employee-first model, right? Employee-centric model. A happy workforce is essential to ensuring that our guests are happy, the communities where we operate are happy, our suppliers, and then our investors. So we call it the virtuous cycle of enlightened hospitality, and all five of those stakeholders are important, but the employees are first. Now, to more granularity answer your question, creating a great culture means being great at communication, both listening to your employees and then sharing with them the current status of the organization. We pride ourselves by ensuring that we have regularly cadence of communications with our employees. Literally yesterday, we did a 3-hour town hall meeting. We do that every quarter. It's, as I said, 2.5, 3 hours, where we're just meeting with the key leaders, our chefs, the GMs, and above, to share with them the performance of the restaurant, the key priorities. So I think being a great communicator is number one. I think caring, stating the obvious, caring for your workforce, both in great times and also difficult times, right? And so we have what I believe best-in-class benefits. We have an environment where we're able to give our employees a hug when they go through difficult periods, and actually grant them resources, financial resources, when they need it. And I think you also create a great culture. I'm going to add two more things. By creating a workforce where you empower your leaders, but you also have high level of accountability. So I think all of those are important, but it begins with a employee-centric model.
Mm-hmm. So on the communication thing, how do you know when is a right amount of communication? Like what is the right amount of communication? Like, when do you say, hey, look, I mean, when do you say, all right, this is something we have to tell the staff, this is something we probably should hold back on? I mean, how do you know what the right level of communication is, at least on the status of the business?
Yeah, I think for me, I would respond by saying it's both an art and a science, right? I mean, the science is really those regularly scheduled cadence of communications. My head of operations, and I have 3, they have monthly updates with their teams to keep them engaged. We have regularly communication that goes on our homepage portal, our employee portal. So that's the science part of. It's not very scripted, but it is scheduled. Every year, we go and do a 2.5-day offsite retreat with our chefs and GMs and above. The art is making sure that I or Danny, members of my senior team, that we're actually in the restaurants, that we're visible, that we're where people can see and touch us and ask us questions. That's really the art of knowing when you need to be in a particular restaurant. If there's a leadership change, then it is likely that I'm going to spend more time in that particular restaurant. I use the term, Jonathan, giving our employees an emotional hug, and I think that's the art part.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that the pandemic really kind of tested all of this, didn't it? I mean, you kind of put your culture was pretty much put to the test, really, the last 3 years, was it not?
Yeah, without question. In March of 2020, we were an organization with roughly 2,500 employees. Roughly 7 weeks later, 8 weeks later, we went down to 45. And so we shuttered all of our restaurants. We had zero revenue for the better part of 90 days. And so our culture, the fiber, the DNA of USHG was clearly tested. Now, what we said to our employees, this is getting back to maintaining a strong culture, is we wanted to be the best employer that we could, right? And so we held on Zoom town hall meetings with former employees because they cared about USHG. They were rooting for us to win, but we were forced to lay off, as I indicated, well over 2,400 people. But we found a way to stay engaged. We helped some of our formerly employed employees find jobs at Whole Foods and Targets and other places that remained open. We kept them abreast of what was going on. We let them know when we were forecasting our restaurants to reopen. And we started our Hugs Fund, which is our employee relief fund. And we have granted out well over $2 million to our employees, some former employees who navigated through the pandemic in very difficult periods. So if they were having difficulty paying rent during the pandemic, we helped them. If they were having difficult with, a parent or loved them, we would write checks, $250, $500, $1,000. And that employee relief fund remains intact today. And so without question, again, it was a challenging period. I think we came out of the pandemic stronger and more confident. And I'm really proud of the team that we have that helped us navigate through the pandemic.
How many employees are you at today?
Today, we are well over 2,600, so we're above our pre-pandemic levels. And my sense is by the end of the year, we'll be approaching 2,800 employees.
Mm-hmm. Is it planned to add restaurants? Where are you guys at with that?
Sure. So the answer to that is yes. So as we think about our business at USHG, we essentially have three revenue streams. We have our fine dining full-service restaurants, which Danny is well known for, Gramercy Tavern and The Modern and Union Square Cafe. We also have an emerging brand called Daily Provisions. We have 4 of them today and 1 under construction. And then our third revenue source is a business that's called Union Square Events. It's a multi-layered business where we do events, as the name would indicate. We operate in 13 sports stadiums across the country. We're in museums. We're in cultural arts centers. So to answer your question, yes, we will grow at a very modest pace. I indicated about the 1 additional Daily Provisions that's under construction. That is in Cobble Hill section of Brooklyn, and that will open in all likelihood in mid-August. Mm-hmm. And then we'd ideally like to open 2 more the following year. So we're excited about that brand. It will have modest growth. And then in the fine dining, again, probably 1 new business a year. As these are big businesses to open, really big enterprises.
Mm-hmm. That events business doing pretty well. Everything I hear about the events, I mean, like that's like 100% back, is it not?
Yes, it is. Now, it also went through very, very dark periods, right?
Yes, it did.
And so if you think about the events business, a good portion of that business is weddings, large celebrations of graduations. There were none in the previous kind of 2.5 years. And now it's back with a vengeance. And that's great news. We did 2 weddings last weekend. And these are 300, 400 big events. And so the event business is thriving. It's helpful that also in May and June, like in most major cities where you have a large number of universities, college celebratory events of mom and grandma coming into a private dining room. That could be 50 people. It could be 100 people. So yes, the event business is thriving.
Yeah. For the record, our parent company, Winsight, is a big events company, and I am very well aware of exactly what happened to events during the pandemic and where it's at now. Because I will tell you, like anytime you go to any sort of conference these days, you're roughly seeing record attendance and things like that. And so people are kind of out and about. It's both the same economy as it was beforehand and very different. It's very unusual. Let me talk a little bit about now. You've been in this business for 30 years, yeah?
Over 30.
Yeah. Why'd you get in the restaurant space in the beginning?
Yeah, in many ways, my story is not too dissimilar from others, right? I was a 15-year-old kid. I was raised by a single mom, and at 15, I wanted to work. And I wanted to help my mom. And so I got my very first job at a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant outside of Philadelphia. And my job was to clean the toilets and mop the floors and clean the parking lot. And that was it. But I ended up staying at that Dunkin' Donuts my sophomore year, junior year, and senior year in high school. My manager, I'll never forget this, Jonathan. I was 15 and 16, and he was 32. And I kept saying, wow, this guy's old. My manager became a close friend and a mentor and a big brother to me, so to speak. And it was on his counsel that I decided to go to culinary school. And to be fair, I had absolutely no idea what a culinary school was. Because in the area where I grew up, in the community in town, there was no one going to culinary school. So that is how I found my way into this business. I knew once I graduated from cleaning the toilets in the parking lot to actually serving guests and interfacing with guests, I kind of found my happy place, if you will. And so I left Dunkin' Donuts, obviously graduated from high school, found my way at Johnson & Wales University in Providence, and the love for food and hospitality was nourished and sprinkled, and that seed just started to grow.
Yeah, it's the restaurant space is fantastic. Like it's just really one of the few industries that you can come in off the street. Obviously, you've got a pretty impressive educational background for sure, but like you can come in off the street and just work your way up to a really nice career. With some effort, and I mean it's hard work. I've spent time working in restaurants. It's definitely hard work, but at the same time, I mean it's simple. At the end of the day, cook good food, provide good service, make sure things are clean, da 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 da.
Yeah,
and you can be pretty successful. It's a great career from that standpoint.
Yeah, listen, I agree. I tell the story often. One of my dear friends and mentor, a gentleman by the name of Dave Pickens, and Dave spent probably 40 plus years with Darden Restaurants. And in the 1970s, Dave was in high school and drove his car into the parking lot of a Red Lobster. Dave later became the president of Red Lobster, right? Never went to college. Later in his career, he took some professional classes at Harvard or Cornell, I can't recall. But Dave was a compassionate leader and a caring leader. He knew the food business but equally important, he knew the people side of the business. And because he could relate to a server and a busser and a bartender, people wanted to follow him. And you're right. This is one of the rare industries where you can start as Dave did, or maybe as I did, and then find yourself over, a course of multiple decades in positions of leadership.
Mm-hmm. So now you took over as CEO exactly when? Was it this year?
Yeah, it was September of last year.
September of last year. Well, all right. So within a year. Time has no meaning to me anymore. But now how is that transition going?
I would say in general, the transition is going well. Danny and I give him a tremendous amount of credit, and we had been working on the transition 9 and 10 months before we actually announced it. And I think the notion of working on succession planning and transitioning is critical. We didn't always get every component of it right, but to plan for succession planning 9 and 10 months prior, I think enabled me to get off to a great start. We actually hired a facilitator, a woman who was just absolutely brilliant, who helped us on organizational design. She helped us to write the narrative, and she helped us, both Danny and I, and at the time, Richard Corain, who's Danny's longtime business partner. He's been with USHG 27 years. And then Patty Simpson, who's my chief people officer. The 5 of us would meet twice a month, again, 9 and 10 months before the announcement. And so I wanted to share that with you. The transition has been going exceptionally well. I'm certainly learning a little bit more. The demands on my time have gone up exponentially. And so I'm learning to kind of balance and navigate that, and still understanding that my number one job is to grow this business and to grow the people.
Mm-hmm. How is it like? So now, Danny Meyer is a legend in this business, and I know he's a legend because roughly everybody tells me this. And how is it like? How is it like following in the footsteps of somebody else? Somebody like that. Now, obviously, he clearly did quite a bit to prepare you for this particular period. And by the way, that's a really good lesson that all CEOs should know, have an idea of how you're going to succeed yourself. That's really important. But anyway, like, how has it been following in the footsteps of somebody like that?
Well, I'd share a couple of things. The good news is like when we made this change, Danny did not go away, right? He's not retired. Yeah. The good news is his office is still across the corridor, less than 10 steps away from my office. So I get to see him and still lean on him and still seek his counsel and advice. So that's great. I would say number 2, there's no question, just psychologically, there's a challenge of following an iconic leader like Danny Meyer. Now, Danny's also remarkably humble and approachable and engaging. And so I think any heartburn or nervousness that I had regarding following an iconic leader, for the most part, it kind of dissipated away. I'm still cognizant of the fact that, like, if I can say, holy shit, I don't want to screw this up, right? But as I said, the good news is he's still close by. We're going on this journey together. The way that we've described this in some ways is this notion of passing the baton. His title now is executive chairman. Most of the batons have already been passed to me. So managing finance and managing marketing, the organization, the direct reports report to me. There's some things that Danny and I will jointly hold the baton together. So as we enter a new market, he still wants to stay engaged with finding the right architect, of finding the right interior designer. He still wants to have a hand in finding the executive chef. And so those are his areas of expertise. And it would be foolish of me to say, no, Danny, I got this. I don't need your help. So that's how we've been thinking about this transition that now is 10 months, is what baton does Chip now hold? What batons are we jointly holding? And what batons, and there are very few, does Danny hold, by himself?
Let me ask you a couple of questions. Like over relatively recently, you've taken stands on a couple of issues. One was abortion. Paying.
Did you say
abortion? Yeah. So having an abortion benefit to help with transport for employees who need to have an abortion, and then guns was another one. And I guess my concern, or my question is like during a period like this, like we've seen, the environment right now politically is just ridiculously divided. And people are getting, frankly, crazy about some of this stuff. Any concern about that in terms of like stepping into issues that might be divisive like that?
Well, what I would say is no. I think it's the role of a leader not sit on the sidelines and render a point of view or perspective, because our followers, our employees, certainly have points of view, and they want to hear from us first and foremost. So I make no reservations, and I know I can speak for Danny. We have very little heartburn about standing on a position. I would say with regard to the position, secondarily, both whether it's abortion or the mass gun shootings, which I've written 2 white papers on, we stand on the position of hospitality and caring. For me, these are not so much political positions, while I am mindful that they are. For us, it's like, if you care for humans, then you have to speak out on the issue. And for me, I was emotional about the mass shootings that happened. I'm still very emotional. And as a person of color, some of the more recent mass shootings, particularly the one in Buffalo, were centered in a community of color. And for me not to have a point of view, I think would be irresponsible of a role of a leader. In making I'd say the last thing, I listen and I learn a lot. I had the opportunity to spend some time with Ken Chenault, the great leader who led American Express for a number of years, including leading American Express through 9/11. Right? Ken is known for saying the role of the leader is to provide reality and hope. And I found myself on those 2 topics. I'm mindful of that kind of mantra, if you will, and I could not just sit by without forming a point of view.
That was a fantastic, and that's a great spot to end on. Chip, thank you so much for joining me this week on the podcast.
Well, it's been a pleasure. My very best to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
And that should do it for this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, which was edited, as always, by Kimmy Kazmarek, artwork by Nico Hines. You may find this and other episodes of the podcast on our website at www.restaurantbusinessonline.com/article/deeper-dive. And please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Jonathan Mays, your host, podcast producer, and the editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business. Thank you for listening.